this sustainability piece is really about still ensuring that there's still ongoing adequate resources to support the innovation. More often than not, we get to a high degree of implementation and then we shift our resources somewhere else. And then we start to minimize, and then that starts to water down. So making sure that there still are the adequate resources to support the ongoing innovation over the long term. That I think a key big piece of this is is the resources that we allot to supporting innovation over the long.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Stephen, you're so right. Quite often, those of you who have been involved in grants will understand this very well. When a
Correct.
grant,
Right.
and that's why I'm a part of researchers, I work with researchers, but when a grant ends and the work doesn't sustain, it hasn't done its job. So part of those grant funded components are to build the sustainability and scalability of the innovation, of the intervention, of the new work, of the change that's happening. And that should be part of all grants. We believe all grants should have an implementation component.
Welcome, everybody. This podcast is all about you. Why knowledge matters. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Stephen Carney and Jenice Pizzuto to talk about their book, Implement with Impact, published by Solution 3. In other words, or according to the author, this book is really about getting better at getting better. I'm so excited to have you both on the show, Mr. Carney and Miss Pizzuto.
Thank you so much, Yannick. We're absolutely thrilled to be here. I think you have two kindred spirits in the title of your podcast being Why Knowledge Matters. Our hearts are all about learning and growing.
Yeah. So good to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Before we start, who is Stephen Carney and Jenice Pizzuto in only one sentence? Let's start with Jenice.
Oh my, that is a hard one. I guess in one sentence, I'd say I'm not done yet.
I love it.
Just continuing learning, failing forward, learning fast, and looking for OTLs, opportunities to learn.
That's so good, Janice. Like that's just so good. I'm just like, wow, that was so beautiful. I'm thinking like super traditional here. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. I'd say I'm definitely similar to Janice, just a lifetime learner, truly dedicated to improving outcomes.
And I can really tell this in your book because it's all about the implementation. And as you mention in the book, getting better at getting better. And, what do you want more in life than really getting better at getting better in no matter what you do? And so I really love the book. It is really a game changer. And everyone who listens really can use that, whether at an individual level or organizational level. It really gives you the tools and strategy to make an impact. And of course, you talk specifically about implementation when it comes to organizations such as programs in schools, which is huge. And so I really, really admire that you took this on, and a project like this takes tremendous effort. So, but first, just give us a little bit context about yourself and where you struggled in implementing whatever it is, whether it is a different diet or, and what you did eventually, just to give some context, and then also a little bit your background. So where was something in your life, in your childhood, that ultimately helped you to decide the path that you are on now?
Wow, that's a big question. Um, First, thank you again on it. And I love this format where we're talking about these. You're cross-sectional, and I think Stephen and I will speak for both of us. We're both cross-sectional, and I think we'll come up with different answers to this question. But in the book specifically, a short answer would be it was frustrating to see such a continual waste of human and resource capital across sectors, whether it was in schools or whether it's in organizations in health, social welfare. We know quite often what works to get things done, but and there's evidence in science to help us get there, but we have this gargantuous gap. And it's okay if we have a gap. Let's say in my personal life, it doesn't impact the community around me, but in the human and health and social welfare and education sectors, it matters because it hurts the constituents, it hurts the kids when they don't get what we've used the human capital and the resource capital. We've spent money to buy something, maybe $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 to see limited impact. And Stephen and I were actually in Scotland at the Global Implementation Science Conference. I want to say almost 6 years ago or 5 years. It was a long time ago, but I'd been working in implementation science for a long time. But at that time, we both almost had tears in our eyes and we looked at each other and said, we have to just stop the madness. And that was the birth of the book. We wanted to make an impact, and our goal is to build implementation literacy globally across sectors. I know this particular book is written with the education sector in mind, but really all the research and the evidence that we did is not in the education sector. It's outside of the education sector. So we wanted to bring it to the planning table of educators because we've worked with them for many years. But the other part of your question, I wanted to do it was there something that happened in your life, your childhood? I had a different childhood, I would say, and it was difficult. And when I went to university, I got to take English as a freshman. I got to take high school English that day. Not my best situation. So the fact that I wrote a book right now is just mind blowing for my kids. I'm the first person to graduate from what college university I come from. A family my mother came over on the Queen Mary from England, and her father was an army person in World War II, and her mother was an English war bride. And through those difficulties, eventually she couldn't read until someone saved her life in 6th grade and taught her to read. So it was things like that, knowing that my mom actually did learn to read and became successful. She's a voracious reader, but also learning as a freshman that even though I had to start over again to write, I could do things. So I looked at having those challenges turned me into thinking about my lifelong journey as failure as an opportunity and enjoying the journey. So I think those challenges in my life spurred me on to not be discouraged.
Yeah, and I think for me, I'll start with personal. I just struggle getting 8 hours of sleep. So sleep is such an important part to healing the body and mind, and that's something I've been trying to implement for years, and finally do it now that I'm over 50. But ultimately, I think the life-changing piece really came as similar to Jenice education in the profession I'm in, the profession Jenice is in, or we spent most of our careers in. It didn't do well by me. And I too grew up first generation college, poverty. And it wasn't until I got into education that I realized it wasn't doing well by lots of students, especially those who are most marginalized and underrepresented. And so I knew we could do better. I knew we could be better, and so it was time to, and we know better. That's the other piece. And so we do know what works in education. We just
I
have a
love your stories and thank you for being so honest because I think that's what I always hear about America, about these success stories and really the opportunities that ultimately that people somehow find in this specific just environment in America where people really see a challenge as something that they can actually grow and turn it around and then became change maker as you are right now. And we are truly blessed. I feel truly blessed to have read this book because it will tremendously improve my life and other people's life in the future. So in your book you mentioned that you gotta get the culture right. Explain what you mean by culture and then how to actually get the culture right. And you also, you read widely, and it's actually also you quoted Peter Drucker, the famous management guru, who sadly passed away, for quite some time. So tell us what you mean by culture and then how to get the culture right.
I just want to make sure I'm on here because it's everything's frozen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No problem.
Okay.
Let's just go to
Okay.
Jenice
I'm,
Pizzuto
I,
and then
Yeah.
I've got it now.
Climate, culture, and context. The pulpit receives climate, culture, context. Culture are a critical component of that, and you're asking for the underpinnings of culture. Really, it's the people and the organization, but also the institutional knowledge in the organization, the institutional baggage in the organization, the belief systems. Do we believe all kids can learn? Well, yes, of course, we all say that. But then as we walk through a school, we might say, well, not those kids. They're being pulled out for X, or we're going to send those kids to a different school. Or so when we really unpack culture, we really get into those belief systems that sometimes are historically entrenched in organizations. And if we don't address culture, it comes up later. So if you're not talking about it in a rich dialogue and discussion in the working in the meeting or in the collaboration, they have it in the parking lot. So we start with that first.
Yeah, I mean, as Janice said, culture, just add on, culture really is the norms and the values. She talked about the beliefs and the behaviors that really characterize the organization. It really encompasses the ways members of that organization interact, how they make decisions, how they approach their job. And, is it a positive and supportive culture? Which is essential to getting implementation and implementing new innovations. I think to add on to Janice, the importance of getting it right, I think facilitates buy-in and ownership. It also enhances collaboration and communication. It builds trust and morale, especially when innovating something new. You need that trust and you need that higher morale, and it supports the consistency and sustainability of what we're trying to achieve together.
And I also love in the book that you mentioned that change is learning and basically learning is change. And a lot of people really struggle with change, because its insecurities invoke some fears and you really address that. So what was kind of the initiator that you realized, hey, you know what? We gotta get change right. We gotta reframe change as actually learning and not as something that it is somehow an interrupter.
Again, we froze. Can I hear the question again?
What was the moment that you realized that actually change is learning and not that it's something negative, but it is part of our journey to make us better. Because as we all know, change is hard. Most people do not like change.
The moment realize, change, and learn. For me was the moment I realized that my implementation efforts weren't working. I remember implementing something in a school system years back and realized I wasn't getting the results. And it really came down to how much was I learning, and about what needed to change, how to change, supports that needed to be put in place to change, my mindset, my belief system. Like there's so much learning that had to take place in order for that change to happen. And then realizing that same level of learning had to take place within the organization.
Yeah,
And then
that's
we
great,
got the results.
Stephen. I thought you were going to talk about Steve and I met many years ago in an organization called Learning Forward. The learning is in the name. And I think one of the things that being a part of that organization underpinned foundational change for me, because they address learning as an ongoing and embedded event. And then began this huge study of andragogy, which is the study of adult learning. So understanding the components to adult learning to impact change was just a mind-blowing moment. And then becoming, when you reflect, once it's one of those things, when you ring the bell, you can't unring it. You can't change without learning, and you can't learn without change. But then it's the empowering of people. And that's what we brought to implementation science that we see as missing. Because we have this deep foundation through many years of work with Learning Forward and then studying andragogy and change, we saw implementation science field understands motivation science, and they study change theory, but they don't understand andragogy yet to the depth that we believe that we should. So that's why our framework is different, is we embed the P in impact is professional learning, and it's ongoing and embedded adult learning to impact the knowledge, skills, and attitudes of the people doing the work. Because right now, when we work with people, it's the organization or the leaders might shame and blame the implementer, the person, the practitioner. And honestly, we hold up a mirror and say, well, did you give them the opportunity to build the skills? Did we provide knowledge? Did we work on the culture and the attitudes? Because if we didn't, that's a systems failure. It's not a person failure. So we really work hard with our implementation framework and plan to focus on learning first, systemically, collectively, with no shame, no blame. And we're trying to build the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes of the people who are doing the work, not just the system leaders, and not providing what we call pigeon PD, where you fly in and you drop a load and fly out, one and done. That's not how you impact knowledge, skills, and attitudes of the people doing the work. And that's learning, and then you can change. We have to learn, and then we change, and then we change, and then you learn. It's essential.
You are so right about the professional learning, the Learning Forward.
That's what forward.
That
I
is,
plan to call it
I
tomorrow.
should have went there, Jenice. Should have went there. You're absolutely right.
Well, we met. That's how we met. We met in Dallas, Texas, where I live now. Many around years ago. But Stephen and I are forever learners, and it was learning. I do give credit to Learning Forward for really opening my eyes to that component.
Yeah.
As learning is a process, but andragogy, I think, Yannick, I love listening to all your guests. Gladys McCreary, oh my gosh, Rob Dunn recently, and they talk about love and learning. She talked about labor and love, and I think I would add learning as part of her L's, because when we're learning, we can have a fuller life, and we can bring learning to the forefront in implementation or any change initiative rather than shame and blame. we'll be doing better as a society.
Well said.
Beautiful. And let's dive into implementation science and what it actually is. And you gave a really beautiful example of hand washing. But before we do that, I really want a little bit know about how you really found each other. And was it like almost like love at first sight? You just kind of, it was the perfect energy. What was it? Tell us a little bit, because writing a book together like this is really hard, like, because you have so many different ways of expressing yourself, and you really have to learn how to compromise and also to actually communicate effectively, right? Because you don't want to offend, let's say Mr. Carney or Miss Pizzuto, right? So just walk us a little bit how this unfolded and to the point where both of you then decided, and actually who suggested, writing a book together.
Well, there's lots of stories there. I think we met, like as Jenice said, during Learning Forward, but we were both coaches for a project through Learning Forward called Learning School Alliance, where we were coaching other schools how to become learning schools, how to become organizations that embrace learning as the adults in the building, didn't stop the learning after college. They continued their learning journey through all their implementation efforts and what have you. We met there and we just hit it off. We honestly had the same energy level. We had we would finish each other's sentences. We just really enjoyed each other's thinking. And so we were just kindred spirits right from the get-go. And then that led us how many years later? Many years later to one day sit in a cafe and say, hey, let's do this thing. And so we sat in a restaurant and came up with an organizational name. And from there, we began to work together around implementation. And out of that came the birth of the book.
Absolutely. Yannick, that's such a great question. I would say, Stephen, it was that energy and the love for learning. And I would say, one of the things I live my life by is you are the sum of the 5 people you surround yourself with. And that's been said for many people. And I always want to be around people I aspire to be like. And Stephen always inspired me. He's an innovator and wonder, and are the 6 geniuses from Patrick Lencioni. And that combination on galvanizing and tenacity and enablement, anyway, all these. So our combination was really, I want to say, yeah, it was good. And I just couldn't. I loved the innovation and the passion around a moral imperative. I think we've had a mutual moral imperative to do good in the world for societies. And he's excited about it. We could stay up till 1 a.m. talking about research and change information. And that just, if you're a forever learner, it fueled me, and I know it fueled him. And I'm just forever grateful that our paths crossed.
Yeah, beautiful. I can really tell there is just this synergy between you and, Mr. Carney. Yeah. Do you want to add something, Mr. Carney?
Yeah, were you able to hear what I said before, or was I frozen? Oh, it keeps freezing, so I'm not sure. So my apologies. Yeah, same. I think Jenice is one of those people that you just automatically connect with because of her gregariousness. Very gregarious and just super friendly and kind. And I think that's what originally drew us together, is that we just both had this high energy to make change. And same, I want to be surrounded by people who inspire me, and Jenice was one of those people who is definitely inspirational. We push each other's thinking. I think that's And part of that is that your relationship ebbs and flows, and you push each other and you pull each other and you come together and you push and pull. And I think that's what makes our relationship, I think, so effective, is that we embrace that within each other, and we're very comfortable in the learning that we do together, and then the learning that we bring to the team, um, to make our work better together. So hands down, one of the, if not the best, partners I've had in my entire career.
Yeah, that's beautiful to hear that. I can really feel that. And also, when I exchanged with you emails, I could really tell you were really wonderful, wonderful human beings, even though, like, that's the very first time we actually met. And the book, and just for everyone who is listening, really, is really impactful. So if you want to make an impact, go on solution3.com and order a copy, because it will change truly your life. And so now let's go on to implementation science and hand washing, and why it's so important. Because again, let's unpack what you mean by implementation science.
At its simplest definition, there's a lot of complicated, long definitions, and now you've heard Steve and I like to, we'll research, and then we feel like our job is to synthesize. So the definition we landed on, which is at its purest, is that implementation science is to make something active and effective. So whatever innovation, evidence-based practice we're talking about, we get to the active part somewhat easy, but then we don't get to the effective part. Hence, I talked about the adopt and abandon cycle, or haphazard implementation, and you'll see where we've spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars for very little uptake, maybe 14 to 20 to 30%, where we don't even check to see, do we have people doing the thing that we just spent money on buying for them? So to make something active and effective, that is its very purest, simple definition. The hand washing example is a legendary example of why we need implementation science. You don't need to apply implementation science in our framework to every single thing we do. Like when I get up to meditate in the morning, I don't need an implementation plan. I know what I need to do to get there. That we talk about complex systems and evidence-based practices. In implementation science, we're talking about how do we implement an evidence-based practice to get socially significant results. So when we're spending money on an intervention that is really important, like reading for students, math for students, healthcare, washing your hands or not washing your hands, that's a life-saving intervention that was not always prevalent. So you'd think that people would just always wash their hands, because we know it can cause you to die or get very sick for something you get committed to the hospital for. The evidence is that prior to our current situation, there was a low uptake, and there are still studies by Johns Hopkins, which I think we referred to in the book. The uptake of nurses and staff in hospitals washing their hands before they engage with a patient was lower than you would like it to be. That why is that? So one of the things, this is why we really brought this type of implementation science to our work. Just telling people to wash their hands and that it's life-saving isn't enough. What happened is when they asked the practitioners, the nurses, the people that are doing it, it's like, why aren't you washing your hands? Well, I have 10 patients and I have to walk all the way down to the end of the hallway to find this thing to wash my hands, and then I have to get back to the patient, and it's just not convenient. So in implementation science, you're going to look at what is the evidence-based practice, look at what are the barriers. They didn't have hand washing stations everywhere. Now, when you come into the room, there's a hand washing station. When you go out of the room, there's a hand washing station. When you enter the hospital, there's a hand washing station. We like to use that one because it's really a great example of including the practitioners, the implementers in the design, and an example of how critical it is to actually involve and use an implementation plan in science to get something that's as life-saving and simple as washing your hands before you touch a patient into play. Stephen, can you add to that?
Yeah, I think I got about half of that simply because of it was cutting out. I think the important thing to know about the washing hand example is a good example because it's an evidence-based example. So I think the important thing to know about implementation is that it's not about just implementing any new idea. It's about implementing something that has evidence behind it that says that it's effective, that it works. We know that sleep matters. Right? How do you implement so that the right and well so you get the sleep that you need? We know that taking time for yourself. So all of the things that we know work because there's evidence and research behind it is what gives, I think, implementation science the weight, because it's really about implementing evidence-based practice. So you have to identify what that best practice is. And then I think back to the hand washing implementation.
But it's also, especially at an organizational level, it's extremely hard, and it means change for all, right?
Yes.
And so how do you help people to change when change is so hard?
Yeah, I think first is understanding that we need to understand readiness. How ready are the people for the change? How ready is the organization for the change? So assessing the needs and readiness, I think, is a critical step so that we best understand what is it that our organization needs in order to change well. And then building that coalition, we call it coalition of champions, and building that coalition of champions, people who will spearhead it, who will be part of the design around the implementation. They'll be the activators of the initiative itself. And you provide training and support for those champions. And then I think then just comes down to resources, making sure you have the right resources, making sure that you've developed and tested the interventions itself in the different context, and learn from those pieces so that before you roll it out to the whole organization, you understand what part of your implementation is going to work and what part needs tweaking and modification, so that when you do roll it out, you have some good information and you're not making as many errors. Training and support, I think, is a critical piece, as well as monitoring and feedback. So, yes, we need lots of training and support. It's not just the one and done, as Jenice said earlier on. It's not just what you call it, the pension effect. It's the ongoing training and the ongoing support, which includes coaching, which includes feedback, and then monitoring that along the way. And how are we doing? What do you need? What support do you need? And then using that cycle of monitoring and feedback, and coaching and support and professional learning and support, just that whole cycle, continue until you get to a level of full implementation. And then you celebrate success and then focus on sustaining efforts.
Ms. Pizzuto, please add to that.
It did a really good job. I think the only thing I would add in there, Stephen really nicely encapsulated kind of quickly a process which we have in the book. He mentioned readiness, and I know there's a readiness survey, which is in the book, and there is an R equals MC squared, readiness equals motivation, which is developed by a group called the Don Forest Group, and we partnered with them, and they adapted it for us for schools that think about your capability, the opportunity, and the motivation, which is a change behavior tool called the COM-B. If we have capability, I'm capable of doing it. That opportunity, I have the opportunity, and with opportunity, we're not talking about, oh, I gave you the materials, and I said, I gave you one-time training. It takes up to 20 times of trying a new strategy, especially more complex. It can take up to 20 times 50 hours. And if it's more complex strategy and human behavior, they have a lot of complex strategies to try to put in place, it take up to 20 times to master initial proficiency. So when we say opportunity, we need the opportunity to practice and fail and get feedback. Stephen mentioned feedback and coaching. That opportunity that's in a psychologically safe manner, where we're supporting and championing one another, which is why, as he described, we believe in a guiding coalition of champions, that we can have our peers to, help me when I'm feeling bad, cheer for me when I'm having success. I can watch them, they can watch me. So opportunity looks like that. And motivation isn't just financial or nudges, but we're thinking about what's the motivation. Like, honestly, those nurses, back to hand washing, no one comes to work wanting to hurt a patient. No teacher comes to school wanting to not give our very best. Sometimes what we know today isn't the best. So what we know today doesn't make tomorrow wrong. It makes yesterday wrong. It makes tomorrow better. The famous saying was that. And with motivation, sometimes we need to tap into that moral imperative, and that intrinsic motivation as to why we're doing something. And those of you that are familiar with Simon Sinek's work and the Golden Circle, Yannick, are you familiar with this work?
Yeah.
Yes. The why, starting with why. And so when we talk about culture, why? And collectively, when we work with teams, when I work with a team, we start first with the why. Why are we doing this? And then they get it, what I call the tip of their tongue and in their back pocket. So we all know why we're doing it. So because there's going to be predictable turmoil, we know it's going to get hard. So we need to understand our why really solidly. And that can be extrinsic and intrinsic. And then we say what we're going to do. And then we say how we're going to do it. Usually we say, here's how we're going to do it, here's what we're going to do, and then we're off to the races. And that comes all the way, circles back to culture. So when we start with why, with this guiding coalition of champions, and we give them the opportunity to build capability, the opportunity to practice, and the motivation to do it, we can get to lasting, sustainable change, which is really why we're all there. We all show up to do our very best. We assume that intent.
In your organization, for example, you never know, principles and leadership, they change, right? But not everyone changes. So elaborate a little bit on why it is so important to have precisely this coalition of champions.
It is so clear that you did such a deep reading. My heart is just like full. You're right. It is one of the things that we have worked really hard on, and I want to just give a huge shout out to Stephen on this. We really thought carefully about how do we design something that, so we stop the madness. This has been a labor of love and a passion to get to this book, because we really want to make an impact. Those who've written next, you don't do it for the money. Yes. For that piece. But the reason we need a guiding coalition of champions is because this is not person or leader dependent. That's what we saw as a failure, especially in schools. Oh, Stephen owns it. He's the principal, so he's going to go check the fire and he bounces that. Or Yannick is going to be he's my rock star teacher. He can do everything. And then we pile all these initiatives and responsibilities on one person, and they can get a promotion. They can change maybe one of their partner moves, and then they move. And it really harms the organizational structure when we don't build a guiding coalition of champions, an implementation team, and a process that is institutionalized. So where is this plan so that anyone can come in? So right now I've been working with this school district. They've been doing this for 3 years, and they've had multiple turnovers in leadership and in team members, but the work lives on. But it's also because horizontally and vertically, they know their why. And they have institutionalized and created the used processes and program tools. They have a shared Google Drive, but it doesn't matter who comes or goes, the work goes on, and they archive the materials that they understand. Now they have for implementation sites is the coaching part of the triangle, with drivers, coaching and training, and staff hiring. So they maintain what's necessary to build the knowledge, skills, and attitudes of the new member, and they have assigned a member to mentor the new member. So when Stephen leaves a school or a district, though information doesn't leave with him.
I think it's so critical because what we are talking right now is really within organizations. And when you think about it, it is so difficult because we all know, let's say, what we should eat, right? But how many of us actually have most of the time whole food, right? Most of the people still stick with, basically the trash, with fast food and so on, right? And just there already on an individual level where say you have it under your control, right? It's only you. But imagine you have to within, you have to enact change within a culture that is an organization that has its unique culture, its unique individuals, beliefs. And let's face it, most of the time in any organization you always have the naysayers, right? They're really not receptive to it. So it really needs also a strong leadership, and actually people who really push through and keep going, and keep somehow also the hope and the faith. Stephen.
Yeah, if I could, I assume we're talking about the importance of the guiding coalition. I caught on to the last end of this when I came back. Am I correct? Yeah, I think to add to Jenice's piece, was Jenice just did so brilliantly, outlining, I think, is the power behind the importance of the guiding coalition is that shared leadership and vision. It creates an opportunity for collective ownership. It creates an opportunity for a unified vision. The part that I appreciate the most about a guiding coalition is really the diverse perspectives and expertise that's at the table. So that's, I think, becomes really powerful when it comes to decision making about how we're going to implement and to problem solving. And we need those diverse perspectives and expertise to make the best decision for the individuals and the organization as a whole as we think about that implementation. It enhances communication because typically, as Jenny said, it falls on the leader. When you have a guiding coalition, you create this enhanced communication piece where you have the opportunity for effective communication channels because you have so many people who are part of championing it. It also creates buy-in and trust, and foster that because of the people are involved. And then Jenice so brilliantly done is just the ability to be able to sustain the momentum and the focus, because no matter who leaves, that momentum remains and that focus remains, simply because you have a guiding coalition to drive it.
Stephen, thank you so much for highlighting the diverse perspectives. That is so critical in that equity, and including stakeholders and community along with that. Oh, that's it. One of the most important parts is having those diverse perspectives. So together we're better, and I love that you added that.
And then obviously someone also has to decide, right, what we are going to do, and actually on what basis do we decide what we actually have to implement, So walk us through this step. And really, you gave a beautiful analogy when it comes to perspective and an elephant.
The elephant parable. 6 blind men are arguing about what an elephant looks like. And so they decide to settle the argument. They're going to just go check out this elephant. So they all walked over and they're checking out this elephant. And the first blind man reaches up and he happens to grab the elephant's trunk. Said, "Oh, an elephant is very much like a spear." And blind man number 2 grabs a hold of the tail. He says, "An elephant is very much like a rope." And then another one touches the side, and he says, "An elephant is very much like a wall." And another one touches the knee. "An elephant is very much like a tree." And they're all very emphatic. And as you can see, they all have a different perspective. And really, we have to see each other's perspective to see the whole elephant. And Stephen so brilliantly added, in your guiding coalition of champions, we build implementation teams, because now you have diverse perspectives. And you asked something else, Johnny, about decision making. And this is something that's hard when we're working with organizations. I'm going to work with somebody on Wednesday. And if you have an implementation team, now we have a consensus. We train them to have a consensus tool and a decision-making process, because truly we advocate for flattened hierarchy, and the team makes the decision, because you're bringing in those multiple perspectives of whether it's a knee, a rope, a wall, because the practitioner quite often, or someone who's actually doing the work, will be able to foresee barriers and problems that someone who's in the systems level just cannot anticipate. Back to hand washing. They thought they had done everything. They told them, they gave them a little poster. They told them how long to wash your hands, how to wash your hands. They did a video, but they didn't ask the nurses, do you have a place to wash your hands? So when we don't include the implementers or the practitioners in the design and the decision-making processes, we find that's how we end up with these haphazard results and things that are abandoned by the implementers, but the system thinks we're still doing it. It's like, of course they're washing their hands. It's not until you audit or survey we find out. So we recommend the FISTA 5. I don't know, Steve, you want to talk about the FISTA 5 decision-making process as part of this guiding coalition the implementation team uses for consensus making.
Yeah, let me just add a little bit more context, I think, to the FISTA 5, which is not an uncommon consensus piece, is as you think about the parable is really about, like, the way we imply that the parable is also thinking about how do we ensure a comprehensive understanding of the innovation and practice, that we're not one person is has an understanding of the trunk or the nose. Like, holistically, there's a holistic approach, and that we have a comprehensive understanding together. That we're fostering collaboration, that we're fostering that opportunity for all the parts to come together, and that way just one part of the elephant isn't represented. And then inclusive decision making, I think, is a part of that, and that's where I think the FISTA 5 comes into play, is like ensuring that we involve a broad range of stakeholders in the decision-making process around the implementation of that innovation. And the FISTA 5 is just simply, as we're thinking and putting ideas on the table, and we have an idea that we want to implement and we want to get consensus of the group, like, this is the idea. FISTA 5 is simply FISTA 5, I'm all in, and I'm actually ready to teach it, right? Where 0 is, no, I'm not. I'm not ready to go there yet. A 1 is, I get the concept, but I'm still not ready to move forward with it. 2 is, so you can kind of see that sequence. I don't remember quite the sequence in my head right now, but so we typically recommend that teams, anybody who has 3, like if they put a 3 up or 2 or 1, we don't move forward with the idea. That means we need more dialogue. We need more discussion. We need more professional learning around the concept, just so that when we do move forward, we're at least, a 4 or 5 as the team moves forward. Actually, it's 3, 4, 5. If you're a 2, 1, or 0, yeah, 3 or above.
I have a minor thing, but I'm ready to go.
Right.
But it
And that's so
allows that
important.
collective understanding.
It is so important. It also acknowledges people, whether it's a teacher, let's say, who just has so much on his or her table, right? And sometimes it just it can come across as overwhelming. So and to really have those processes in place to build this buy-in, to make it a successful journey for all, and really for the success of the school, is really critical. You also talk about the architects and the builders, and I love this analogy because you really need both, and somehow they are really interrelated, and you basically wear both hats. Miss Pizzuto.
Oh, thank you. See, I'll let you take that one as the elephant.
Go ahead. I'm good. I'll chime in here because I'm thinking right now. I'm thinking about your question, right? Because he's really talking about the plan and prepare stage.
Yeah, in the plan and prepare stage. So we're nicely walking through the stages of the framework. Decide, what are we going to do? we're going to build a team. We're going to take an evidence-based practice. We're going to get the organization ready. We're going to have resources and access to materials, those sorts of things. And then plan and prepare. And the reason we wrote this book and this framework, we missed this. So in plan and prepare, it's the stage usually we decide, hey, we're going to get hand washing stations. We're going to get a new science of reading curriculum, and then we'll ready to implement. That is very typical. It's just what organizations, it's human nature. I decide what I'm going to do, I do it. Like you said, even though we know what to eat. We miss the plan and prepare stage. And in plan and prepare, we have an analogy or a metaphor for each chapter. And thinking about it through architects and builders, someone's got to design the house. And in the plan and prepare stage, the architects, this is the guiding coalition who are actually including the implementers, the people who do the work, not just the leaders, because we need the people who are actually a part of the day-to-day work to identify the predictable turmoil we're going to encounter, to identify the barriers that we're going to encounter so we can plan and prepare to overcome them. We know it's going to happen. So we think about that as that architect. Like the architect is designing for the builders because the builders are going to actually have to come together with all the materials to make it work. So we're looking at the leadership, the practitioners, the stakeholders coming together during the plan prepare stage to get the organization ready, whether it's through acquiring materials, whether it's through really lots of, I mentioned andragogy before, that ongoing embedded professional learning. How are we going to skill up the staff? I'm going to go back to the KSAs, knowledge, skills, and attitudes, so that they have the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to deploy the new evidence-based practice. And plan and prepare, the architects and builders are really building the house to get it ready to go into the implement stage. Before we start putting up curtains, or before we start picking, that might be picking out the tile, but we want to have everything primed and ready so that we can avoid those barriers and that predictable turmoil that we know is going to happen in the implement stage. We know it's coming. Let's get ready for it.
Such a great analogy, architect builders. I think I'm having I'm thinking through kind of that whole metaphor here in regards to, not even metaphor, just kind of the I think about the architects through the lens of like the planning stage. Like they envision the project, they create the detailed blueprints, they select the best materials, they ensure the design meets all requirements hand in hand. So that whole process in the the planning stage is really identifying the needs, which is setting the goals, selecting the evidence-based practice, getting approval to implement it, to buy it, to purchase it, to what have you, and then identifying those implementation strategies and how are we going to monitor and evaluate that process all along the way, and then back to the builders, which is getting the resources, the professional learning plan together, laying the foundation, which is really around initial training, and building the framework, which is really the ongoing support that we create. So great analogy of the builders, the architects and builders. I even think like a site preparation of an architect and builder, like the organizational readiness is the site preparation, right? Stakeholder communication, which is our communication plan that's laid out in this work. And then really pilot testing, which is constructing the model. And so, yeah, lots of great connections to the metaphor, architects and builders, and how together they make it happen.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, it just comes into my mind an example of where people, architects or builders, plan the building, let's say, where you all the time get lost, right? There's also a school that I actually was working. It's really hard. It's just it's not an easy, construction is a really, really complex way of like basically, it signifies like an animal, let's say, or a lot of those kind of buildings, which is at first glance, it looks great, but the builders and especially the architects didn't really factor in the user experience, right? And
Yes.
so it's really hard. People just get completely lost every time. So I remember when I was living in Australia, people all the time, they came late because they didn't find the room, and just people knew it, but that was built, let's say maybe 20 years ago, where all of a sudden someone had an idea. Why don't we, build more fancy buildings, right, to just look great, but then ultimately for the people it's a huge hustle, right, because it's just difficult. And that's also why I really appreciate, and why this Implement with Impact book is so powerful, because it walks you through the stages. And again, if you're an individual, a teacher, a principal, a consultant, a mom, a dad, or whatever, this is really the book to go to.
Yeah, I think just an added, I think the difference in traditional architect builder model, the difference here is that the architects include the implementers. They include the people who are actually living in the building. They're not just an expertise base only. Same with the builders. Like, it really is this interconnected web of diverse implementers and diverse leaders and diverse perspectives, and the key to all of that, I think, similar to the traditional model of architected builder, the key is, in order for it to be successful, is high levels of communication, and that communication has to
Yeah.
be there among all of the team members.
Ms. Pizzuto, do you have anything to add? I also love that you mentioned also storytelling, which is also to some extent part of the implement stage.
Yes, I love, love, love that you bring that up. There's some research that's happening right now on a team that I'm working with with that they're actually writing this huge grant for criminal justice, and their concept is to embed storytelling and narrative in the implementation of the evidence-based practices for correctional facilities. And because leaders aren't understanding that we need to actually use a narrative or a metaphor to help people understand the work, to do the work. It's really, really important to include narrative, and that is a part of the what was I saying? It is a part of that implement stage. Is once we start to implement, we want to have the people who are doing the work, and that's why when we have an implementation team that is part of the guiding coalition, it's not Jenice who's I'm in charge of this, I'm the principal, or I'm the director, or I'm the president of the company. We're going to hear from Yannick, who has been along with us the whole way, and he's going to give us a story as to why are we doing this, what are we going to do, and then how are we going to do it. And I'm much more likely to link arms with you, Yannick, as a colleague, or as a co-teacher or a co-director, than I am to just listen to the president or the leader of the company or the principal, because the story that you tell, I believe, it really is. It's like we want to hear from the people doing the work to help us get to the work. So in the implement stage, really, it is where if you've taken time in the plan of repair and you have a guided coalition champions, they can tell the story of why we're doing this. Then they can tell what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, and that we're going to do it together. We're going to cross the bridge. We're going to do holding hands. They may be crying, but at least the new person now feels like something's being done to them. When change comes, it's quite often something that starts at the top, and then we tell people we do it to them. With the guiding coalition of champions and with implementation science, if you're using stages, we do it together. And what Stephen and I talk about is human learning center design elements. Those are the outer circle components of our framework. And really that is the doing it together and letting the implementer be a part of the process and let them tell the story of why, what, and how collectively with those diverse perspectives and acknowledging that we're going to fail. So that's why we have assess and adjust. We say straight out, like, we're not going to get it right the first time. Just plan on it. So we have a plan. We're in our framework. We're going to assess and adjust. No shame, no blame. It's like, how's it going? What do you need? Let's do it. Let's try it again. So we have a process called learning walks, which is described in the implement stage. We're going to walk together. It's not an evaluation. It's not anything that is a survey of are you doing it. It's the team together, the implementer, and looking at what did we agree that we are going to do? Are we doing it or not? It's not how can we help? Did we not give you the materials? Did we not give the proper training? This is a systems check. It's not a person check. So narrative is important in allowing the people who are involved in the work talk about the work is even more critical.
Mr. Carney, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't think there's anything to add there. I think that's in its simplest format, and Jenice just did, I think, a brilliant job just capping that concept and what we're talking about when we talk about those stages and how important that guiding coalition is. So nothing more to add.
I loved what you just said, because usually it always feels like that we have to, something happens to us. So we do implementation to you, you have to do it now. But actually it is also a change in mindset. Everything happens for us. And so that's also one of the elements in the book I really like. Is this cultivating a mindset, a grow mindset across the board, which is the new frame in for and not to us. So I really appreciate that that this is so clear. And then empowering way of making or helping people to get better at really getting better. And I think that's also how you forge a culture which ultimately people love to go to work. I mean, oftentimes for a lot of people, it's really, they drag themselves to work, right? Because it just doesn't really feel like they belong, or the organization just doesn't have the tools, the implementation tools, for example, huge, to really move the organization and the people forward, as they wish to. The spread and sustain phase 2, that's something which is critical. Please elaborate that. And I love the analogy that you give in the book, that no matter what you do, you gotta start with the end in mind. It's like starting with your life. Think about your very last day you're alive, right? What kind of regret do you want to avoid by all means? And I think that's where truly living and successfully working together really starts. You talk about the spread and the sustain phase, and you mentioned that it's so critical to really start with the end in mind. So please elaborate what you mean by that, and why the spread and sustain phase is critical for a new initiative in the school to sustain and to have the impact that you want to achieve.
Thanks, Johnny. It is to start with that in mind. In the decide stage, you start planning for spread and sustain. And this is where, especially in the education sector, we see such a gap. There's lots of opportunity for improvement here, because we think about purchasing and we think about adopting, we think about utilizing, but we don't use implementation science to ensure that the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're spending is actually going to result in change, that the day-to-day practice of the people doing the work is actually going to happen. So you really do want to, in the decide stage, we start having, that's why we have, you may make SMART goals. We're going to use in your, that's why using the planning tool and a template, really, because you're going to start working toward the spread and sustain stage right away. So when you get to that chapter, when you get to that stage, it's not a surprise. We've been working on it all along. We've been using our architects and our builders and seeing the whole elephant to make sure that it isn't something that we're doing. Oh, wait a minute. Did we think about this? So there really is a lot of, there are a lot of tools and resources that are referenced in that chapter. But the big takeaway is to start thinking about it right away and use the tools you're building toward that collectively so that when you get to spread and sustain, it's just part of the process. So we're thinking about sometimes HR policies have to change, community partnerships might have been developed. Because if you've really implemented a big change, we're going to now only hire people who understand how to analyze data. We're going to be, so we don't want you to wait till the end to realize, oh, now we just hired 3 principals that have any idea about MTSS or social emotional learning, whatever it is that we're working on. They're going to undo that work. So your hiring practices is something that we really talk about a lot in that spread and sustain stage. Thinking about that along the way and making sure that we actually, if you are adopting something and you're going to spend the money, Stephen and I would just ask you to write a goal. Is your intention to get 80% of staff doing it? If not, then don't bother, because you're wasting the human and resource capital. If you're just doing it to check a box, just keep doing what you're doing.
We have a colleague of ours who often says, for every new innovation, every dollar you spend on a new innovation, her name is Joelle and Gillian, every dollar you spend on innovation, you should spend $4 on the professional development, on the support around that. And I think the critical piece to spreading and sustaining, beyond like the things that we know, right? We know spreading and sustaining, the importance is having long-term impact, scalability, building capacity, and institutionalization, as Jenice kind of laid out there, so that you get what you're supposed to get, and you get high degrees of implementation and fidelity. I think what's often missed is that implementers, organizations often fail to develop a clear plan for scaling the innovation. And so making sure that there is a plan to scale it. So once we start to see that 80% of our implementers, how are we going to continue that sustainability so that anybody who new comes in, we don't just start to see it gradually water down. But again, back to that 1 to 4, right? Provide professional development that's ongoing, even if you're at high degrees of fidelity. Yeah. Because we do get relaxed. We do get, so we need those reminders. So providing ongoing professional development, I think, is really critical to this model. And then back to the mantra, don't stop in monitoring and evaluating its effectiveness. It's not just part of the implementation stage itself, it's also part of the sustainability. And we want to go, are we still getting the results that we're getting because we still have a high degree of implementation? And I think, Jenice, you had mentioned policies and procedures. Is that innovation embedded in policies and procedures? So no matter who's leading, we could go right back to those policies and procedures to say what we're doing is part of the organizational norm. It is who we are. It's not just what we do. It's who we are.
This is so important. And I think, in generally speaking, human nature, we need our accountability, right? And that's what you really enforce on an organizational level, which is so critical. Otherwise, most of us, I think no one really can without accountability, having an accountability partner, or again, policies in place and people who actually supervise and the progress and catch up on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. Could I also add to the sustainability, this the sustainability piece is really about still ensuring that there's still ongoing adequate resources to support the innovation. More often than not, we get to a high degree of implementation and then we shift our resources somewhere else. And then we start to minimize, and then that starts to water down. So making sure that there still are the adequate resources to support the ongoing innovation over the long term. That I think a key big piece of this is the resources that we allot to supporting innovation over the long.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Stephen, you're so right. Quite often, those of you who have been involved in grants will understand this very well. When a grant,
Right.
and that's why I'm a part of researchers. I work with researchers, but when a grant ends and the work doesn't sustain, it hasn't done its job. So part of those grant funded components are to build the sustainability and scalability of the innovation, of the intervention, of the new work, of the change that's happening. And that should be part of all grants. We believe all grants should have an implementation component.
Now, on a more personal level, how do you implement with impact on a personal level? So what do you do on a day-to-day basis in order for you to, write such a great book, being a powerful impactor and change maker in the field of education? Miss Pizzuto, please.
Oh gosh, like that's such a great question. So I was traveling to another state last week, and I was preparing a presentation on a Sunday. That happens. And I got a text message that said, "Your flight has been canceled." Ah! Like, do I have 50 people change their schedule? So I use this story because I applied to communication science. True, wholly and truly. I ended up, analyze the problem, decide on a solution, consider the barriers. Do I I ended up flying to a different city, renting a car, driving for 5 hours. But I said, oh, I got to see Mount Shasta. I got to see Shasta Lake. I got to see these birds. I had joy along the way. I had a Titan Coalition champions that I consulted before I made my decisions. Of course, I called a client and I, talked to local agencies on like what would be the best. Are the roads going to be cleared? What's the weather like? That's a simple example of applying implementation sites in my life. And honestly, one time we had a very terrible health scare in my family where my husband was in the hospital. And had I not been a part of evidence-based care and learning about implementation science, I wouldn't have had the knowledge and the skills to interrupt the services he was getting. I'll keep it short, but he ended up being life-flighted to a different hospital as a result of, because I was able to see that they didn't have standards of practice. They didn't have evidence-based care. They were using implementation science at this hospital. And the same hospital A had the same information as hospital B, and hospital B said, we're going to fly in, tell his wife he's going to be life-flighted. In 20 minutes, he's going straight into surgery. I use this. Learning about implementation science changed my life because I can apply it and I take a math and I problem solve and I realize I have a coalition to help me when I'm come across problems in my life.
Mr. Carney.
I would say my daily piece is, we had mentioned earlier the importance of planning and preparing. And I make it a high priority to plan and prepare in my life. And maybe that's more a personality trait of mine, but definitely, of course, aligns to implementation science. But planning and preparing, really understanding the situation. And then I have, every day I have just mindfulness. I have time where I just pause and take in, as Jenice said, the scenery as she is driving, but just take in the surroundings so that I can be better prepared. and better understand. And sometimes that mindfulness takes place in my sauna. So, it's just a great place to just stop, pause, and think about what my next steps are.
What's the one lesson that really taught you a wonderful lesson about yourself and your life?
Yana, could you repeat the question?
What is a mistake, challenge, or biggest failure that you thought you something valuable about yourself?
For me, I think um I, I think it's just a mistake I made in the past is not just being me. And I do way better when I bring my full and authentic self to the table. And when I am who I am, um, with understanding that the people around me are who they are.
Beautiful.
I love that, Stephen. I think for me, it took me a long time to get here, but I tell myself, and I have to do it repeatedly, don't believe what you tell yourself in your head. So what I mean by that is I don't believe what I tell myself about myself, because we're sometimes I just, that imposter syndrome. We're at my desk, and here's what I have at my desk. It says, "Focus, Pizzuto, don't get lost inside your head. You can do this." Because I always just think I can't, no matter what I've accomplished, I just am daunted by the next task. And, preparing for this podcast or writing a book. I don't think I can write a book. I mean, come on. So every day I work hard to try to tell myself that you can do hard things.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing this. I think the biggest accomplishment is really both, it perfectly relates to what you just said, Miss Pizzuto, is to just, the biggest accomplishment is just being myself, right? Just being me, right? And to find that and ultimately just be your authentic self is just so freeing, right? And it takes courage. And as you just said, still having this imposter syndrome, which a lot have, especially women actually more than men. And so thank you for sharing this. And it's such a thrill to have people with this maturity and this incredible loving and positive energy that we so much need in this world. And so really it it gives hope. So last question, what makes you feel alive?
Learning.
Beautiful.
And I would say being with like-hearted but diverse-minded.
Well, that makes sense.
Stephen, Carney, and Jenice Pizzuto, thank you so much for being on the show. And I can truly tell that you are truly a gift for myself and truly for the world. And now, everyone who was listening to this podcast, please go on solutiontree.com and get a copy of Implement with Impact. I can promise you it will change your life for you getting better at getting better in your life. Thank you so much. Stephen Carney and Jenice Pizzuto.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.